Welcome back, guys, to Mr. Cursed. Today I'm telling you 7 true scary stories from the Appalachian Mountains. These are the kind of stories that make people in small mountain towns scared to go outside at night. Stories they don't like talking about, even to their own families. But before we start, please hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Don't forget to like this video and share it with your friends. I'd also love to know where you're watching from, so drop a comment below. Your support really helps me make more videos like this. All right, let's get into these creepy mountain stories. I'm 32 now, and I work youth ministry at a Baptist church in Tennessee. Back in 2018, when I was still pretty new to the job, I thought I had everything figured out about connecting with teenagers and building their faith. Pastor Walsh, that's me, was going to take 6 kids up to this church camp near Poison Creek, Virginia for a weekend retreat. Mix of community service and spiritual growth, you know? Looking back, I should have done more research about that particular area. The kids were your typical youth group mix. Sarah and Marcus were the committed ones, always first to volunteer for prayer or Bible study. Then you had Tyler, Jess, Brandon, and Amy. Good kids whose parents basically made them come. Amy especially seemed like she'd rather be anywhere else, always checking her phone until I collected them Friday night for our digital detox. The camp itself was pretty basic. 3 cabins, a dining hall, and a little chapel surrounded by thick Virginia mountain forest. Cell service was spotty anyway, so I figured the no phones rule would help everyone focus on what really mattered. Our first evening went exactly how I'd planned. Campfire service, kids sharing testimonies, even Amy seemed to warm up during the s'mores. We talked about faith in difficult times, how God tests us to make us stronger. I remember feeling proud watching them open up to each other, thinking this retreat was already succeeding. The plan was trail maintenance Saturday morning, then visiting some elderly folks in the valley below who needed help with yard work. Simple Christian service, building character and community. I had this whole speech prepared about finding God in the wilderness, how Jesus himself went into the mountains to pray. That first night, though, something felt off about the forest around us. I've been camping since I was a kid, and mountain woods have their own rhythm. Owls calling, leaves rustling, maybe a raccoon or two getting into something. But after we banked the fire and everyone headed to their cabins, the silence was too complete. Not peaceful quiet, but wrong quiet. Like everything with sense had cleared out. Around 2 a.m., Tyler knocked on my cabin door. Kid was pale as paper, said he kept hearing footsteps circling their cabin. Not like a deer or bear. Bipedal, deliberate steps, like someone walking a perimeter. I figured maybe a park ranger checking on us, though it seemed late for that. Told Tyler to try and get some sleep, that we'd sort it out in the morning. But when I lay back down, I heard them too. Slow, measured footsteps that didn't match any animal I knew. They'd go around our cabin, pause at each window, then continue. Almost like someone was counting us. Morning brought footprints in the soft dirt around all 3 cabins. Human-shaped but wrong. Too long, toes stretched out weird, and deep like whatever made them was heavy. Real heavy. The prints formed perfect circles around each building. I tried to convince myself it was just some local kids messing with the church group, but the tracks were huge. Size 15 at least, maybe bigger. Saturday's service work went fine during daylight hours. The kids seemed to forget about the night sounds once we got busy clearing fallen branches from the hiking trail. Mrs. Henderson, one of the elderly ladies we helped, made us sweet tea and told stories about growing up in these mountains. But when she heard we were staying up at Poison Creek Camp, her face changed. Said folks used to hunt different things in those hills back before her grandmother's time. Wouldn't say what, just kept shaking her head and muttering about people not belonging in certain places after dark. That second night, things escalated. The footsteps came earlier, around 11 p.m., and this time there were more of them. Multiple sets, moving in coordination like a patrol. Sarah started crying in the girls' cabin. Said she saw a tall figure standing perfectly still outside their window. When she looked again, it was gone. Brandon swore something tried the door handle on their cabin, just testing it real gentle-like. I tried the emergency radio, but all I got was static. Even during the day it had been working fine. But now nothing. The kids were getting scared, and honestly, so was I. This wasn't in any youth ministry handbook. How to handle when your spiritual retreat turns into something that makes no earthly sense. The smell hit us around midnight. Musky, wild, like a wet animal, but stronger. It hung in the air around the camp, thick enough you could almost taste it. And the sounds, not just footsteps anymore, but this soft tapping against the cabin walls. Rhythmic, patient, like fingers drumming on wood. The kids huddled together in my cabin, all 6 of them plus me crammed into that little space, and I'm supposed to be the adult who has answers. "Pastor David," Amy whispered, first time she'd called me by name all weekend. "Why would God let this happen during a church retreat?" I didn't have an answer for her. Still don't, if I'm being honest. Sunday night was when they got bold. Something large pressed against the dining hall door, testing the lock mechanism. We could hear it breathing, these slow, deep inhalations like it was scenting us through the walls. Then the sounds moved to the chapel, same deliberate pressure against doors and windows. Marcus started praying out loud, voice shaking, and the rest joined in. I'd never heard kids pray with such desperate faith. The tapping started on our cabin roof, methodical, moving from corner to corner like something was mapping the structure. Through the small windows, we caught glimpses of shadows that were too tall, moving wrong. They'd pause, cock their heads like they were listening to our whispered prayers, then continue their inspection. Around 3 a.m., Brandon looked out the back window and went rigid. "Pastor," he breathed. "There's one right there. Just standing." I looked. 20 feet from our cabin stood a figure that might have been human if you didn't look too close. Too tall, arms too long, skin that seemed gray even in the darkness. It wasn't moving, just watching us watch it. When Sarah whimpered, the thing tilted its head, curious-like. That's when I knew we had to leave. Whatever these things were, they weren't going to let us wait for morning. I gathered the kids, grabbed the van keys, and we made our move. The front door opened onto 3 more figures standing in our path to the parking area. They didn't threaten or advance, just blocked the way like they were hurting us. We went out the back window instead, all 7 of us tumbling into the night in our pajamas and shoes. The van started on the second try. I still thank God for that. And we drove down that mountain road faster than was safe, leaving everything behind except what we could grab in 30 seconds. The weird thing? Soon as we got about 5 miles down the mountain, my cell phone picked up signal again. Emergency radio started working. Even the van's GPS, which had been glitching all weekend, suddenly knew exactly where we were. We never went back for our stuff. Church sent a couple of deacons up the next week to collect our gear, and they found everything exactly where we'd left it, neat and undisturbed. No sign of footprints, no musky smell, nothing to prove what we'd experienced. But those men said the whole place felt wrong, like they were being watched the entire time. The kids and I, we don't talk about that weekend much, but it changed something in all of them, and not in a bad way. Their faith got deeper, more serious. Amy's in college now, studying to be a missionary. Says that night taught her there are forces in this world bigger than anything she'd imagined, and she wants to be on the right side of that battle. Me? I still lead youth retreats, but I research the locations real careful now, and I never, ever book anything near Poison Creek. Some places aren't meant for human visitors, especially after dark. I learned that lesson, and it's one I don't need to repeat. To this day, I can't handle the sound of tapping on walls or windows. Sets my teeth on edge every single time. My name's Elena, and I'm 34 now, working as a botanist for the state university. But back in 2015, I was desperate. My dad had been fighting cancer for 8 months, and the doctors had basically told us there was nothing left they could do. 3 months, they said. Maybe less. I'd always been the one in the family who believed in science, in facts, in what you could prove in a lab. But when someone you love is dying and medicine is given up, you start looking at things differently. I'd been researching everything I could find about plant-based cancer treatments. Most of it was garbage, honestly, but there were some interesting compounds being studied. That's when I met this old Cherokee woman at a conference in Asheville. She pulled me aside after my presentation and told me about plants in eastern Kentucky that could change people from the inside. Said they grew in a place called Pine Ridge Valley, somewhere near the Virginia border. The way she said it made my skin crawl a little, but when you're watching your father waste away, you'll chase any lead. My family thought I was losing it. My mom kept saying I was wasting vacation time on false hope. My brother called it magical thinking, but I'd already spent my savings on experimental treatments that didn't work. What was one more trip? I loaded up my Honda with camping gear, collection supplies, and enough food for a week. The plan was simple: find these plants, collect samples, get them back to the lab for analysis. If there was even a chance they contained something that could help Dad, I had to try. The drive to Pine Ridge Valley took me deeper into Appalachian country than I'd ever been. GPS lost signal about 30 miles from where I thought the valley was supposed to be, so I was navigating by old Forest Service roads and hand-drawn directions the Cherokee woman had given me. The woods got thicker as I drove. Older somehow. Trees so tall they blocked out most of the sunlight even at midday. When I finally found the valley, I understood why she'd been so cryptic about it. The vegetation was impossible. Plants that shouldn't have been able to grow together were thriving side by side. I'm talking about species that need completely different soil conditions, different climates, different everything. But here they were, growing in abundance like nothing I'd ever seen in 20 years of studying botany. The air itself felt different, thicker, almost electric. I set up camp near a creek that ran through the center of the valley. The water was crystal clear and cold, and the plants along the banks were the healthiest specimens I'd ever encountered. I spent the afternoon collecting samples, feeling more hopeful than I had in months. Some of these plants were pulsing with life in ways that didn't make scientific sense, but I didn't care about making sense anymore. I just wanted something that could save my dad. That first night, I fell asleep clutching one of the sample bags, dreaming about walking into the hospital with a cure in my hands. Looking back now, I should have paid more attention to how quiet the valley was. No birds, no insects, no wind. Just that electric feeling in the air and plants that seemed to breathe on their own. I woke up with my arms on fire. Not literally, but the burning sensation was so intense I thought I was having an allergic reaction. Red welts covered both arms where the plant samples had touched my skin while I slept. But as I looked closer in the morning light, I realized these weren't normal rashes. Tiny green shoots were growing out of the red marks. Plants were sprouting from my flesh. I tried to pull them out, but they were rooted under my skin. I could feel them connected to something deeper, like they were tapped into my bloodstream. The pain was incredible, but underneath the panic, I noticed something else. My vision was sharper. I could hear the creek from 50 yards away like it was right next to me. When I accidentally cut my hand on a thorn trying to remove one of the shoots, the wound healed in seconds, leaving behind green scar tissue. Over the next few hours, the plant growth accelerated. Green tendrils were threading through my bloodstream, visible under my skin like some kind of infection. My body temperature dropped, and I realized I wasn't thirsty anymore. Instead, I was craving sunlight like I'd never craved anything in my life. When I stood in a patch of morning light filtering through the trees, the sensation was better than any drug. That's when I heard my father's voice calling for help. It was impossible. Dad was 300 miles away in a hospital bed, barely conscious most days. But I could hear him as clear as if he was standing right next to me, begging me to bring the healing plants home. The voice was coming from deeper in the valley, and even though every rational part of my mind knew it couldn't be real, I found myself walking toward it. The deeper I went, the more wrong everything became. I found other people, or what used to be people. Human torsos with plant legs and arms, root systems where their feet should have been. They could still talk, still think, but they weren't human anymore. One of them, a woman who said she'd been a nurse from Louisville, explained what was happening to me. "The plants do cure cancer," she said, her voice rustling like leaves. "They replace the diseased cells with healthy plant matter. But they don't stop there. They keep replacing until there's nothing human left. She told me the plants had been calling to desperate people for decades. Cancer patients, people with chronic illnesses, anyone who would do anything to heal themselves or their loved ones. The transformation was slow at first, then faster as the plant network grew stronger inside your body. She'd been there for 2 years. She thought, though time didn't mean much anymore when you were part of the forest. I could feel it happening to me. The roots growing through my organs, replacing my heart function with something that pumped chlorophyll instead of blood. My lungs were changing too, breathing becoming secondary to photosynthesis. I was starting to need soil and water instead of food, and sunlight was becoming as essential as oxygen. The worst part was the shared consciousness. Through the root network, I could feel the thoughts and memories of everyone who'd been transformed. I experienced their deaths as the plants absorbed their human selves. But I could also feel their relief, their freedom from pain, their connection to something larger than individual existence. The plants kept showing me visions of bringing Dad here, of watching the cancer cells in his body get replaced by healthy plant tissue. I saw him walking again, strong and green and immortal. But I also saw what he would become, what I was becoming. My arms were already changing texture, skin becoming bark-like. My fingers were elongating into root systems. I had maybe an hour before the transformation became irreversible. That's when I remembered something Dad had said to me before the cancer got really bad. He'd told me that living authentically mattered more than just surviving, that it was better to die as yourself than live as someone else's idea of who you should be. I used my camping knife to cut away as much of the plant growth as I could. The pain was indescribable. The plants inside my body fought back, sending waves of agony through my nervous system. But I kept cutting, kept pulling out roots that had grown through my flesh. I couldn't get all of it. Green veins still run under my skin, and I can still photosynthesize if I need to, but I removed enough to stay human. The root feeders followed me as I ran for my CR, but they couldn't leave the valley. They sent attacks through the soil trying to trap me with sudden plant growth, but I made it to the Honda and got out of there. I was too late to say goodbye to Dad. He died while I was in that valley, thinking I'd abandoned him to chase some crazy hope in the mountains. I got home with abilities I never asked for, and guilt I'll never shake. The green scarring on my arms has faded but never disappeared completely. I have to spend at least an hour in direct sunlight every day or I get sick. And sometimes late at night, I can still feel the root network calling to me. I help other families dealing with cancer now, but I never mention Pine Ridge Valley. Some cures cost too much, even when they work. Especially when they work. I still think about those people I left behind sometimes. Part of me wonders if they've found the peace I couldn't accept. But then I remember my dad's words about living authentically, and I know I made the right choice, even if it was too late to matter. I was 29 when my Uncle Eddie died in that car accident on Route 19. Honestly, I hadn't seen him in maybe 5 years, but when the lawyer called saying he'd left me his hunting cabin up in West Virginia, I figured it was a sign. I'd just gotten laid off from my construction job in Pittsburgh, third time in 2 years, and my bank account was looking pretty grim. The lawyer said the cabin was worth maybe $15,000 to $20,000 if I fixed it up right. That sounded like enough to get me back on my feet, maybe even start my own contracting business like I'd been thinking about. So I loaded up my old Ford pickup with some basic tools and drove down to Beckley to get the keys. The lawyer, this older guy with thick glasses, gave me directions that involved a lot of turn left at the Big Oak and follow the creek bed for about 2 miles. He mentioned there wasn't much cell service up there, but back in 2006, that didn't seem like such a big deal. I had my flip phone for emergencies and figured I'd only be there a few days anyway. The drive up those logging roads took longer than expected. My truck groaned and wheezed up the steep grades, and I had to stop twice to let the engine cool down. The trees got thicker the higher I went, blocking out most of the afternoon sun. When I finally found the cabin, tucked back in this little hollow surrounded by dense woods, I have to admit it looked pretty decent for a place that had been sitting empty for 3 months. It was just one room, basically, kitchen area, living space, and a bed in the corner. No electricity, no running water, but Uncle Eddie had set it up nice with a wood stove and kerosene lanterns. What really caught my attention, though, were all the hunting trophies. Deer heads, a black bear hide, turkey tail feathers. The man had been quite the hunter. There were also some nice mounted fish on the walls, and what look. It like a whole fox that had been stuffed and posed like it was mid-leap. I spent that first day going through Eddie's personal stuff, old hunting magazines, some photos of him with various kills, a few bottles of moonshine hidden in a coffee can. Found a nice set of hunting knives and an old bone saw he must have used for butchering his game. The whole place smelled like wood smoke and old leather, which was actually kind of comforting. Made me think about the stories my dad used to tell about growing up in these mountains. That first night went smooth as could be. I cooked some beans on the wood stove, read one of Eddie's hunting magazines by lantern light, and fell asleep listening to the normal sounds you'd expect. Owls hooting, wind rustling through the trees, a creek babbling somewhere in the distance. I remember thinking this might not be such a bad way to live, at least for a while. I woke up the next morning to complete silence. And I mean complete. No birds singing, no insects buzzing, not even any wind. When you're used to the sounds of the forest, that kind of quiet hits you like a physical thing. It was wrong in a way I couldn't put my finger on. I stepped outside to check on my truck, and that's when I saw them. Animal skulls arranged in perfect circles around the cabin. Deer skulls, mostly, but some smaller ones I couldn't identify. They hadn't been there the night before, I was sure of that. Now, I'm not the type to jump to supernatural conclusions right off the bat. My first thought was maybe some local kids were messing with me, trying to scare off the city boy. But the skulls were placed so precisely, like whoever did it had used a compass and measuring tape. And some of them looked old, really old, with moss growing in the eye sockets and everything. The air felt different too, thicker somehow, like right before a bad thunderstorm, except there wasn't a cloud in the sky. I kept having to take deeper breaths, and there was this sharp smell in the air, kind of like ammonia mixed with something rotten. My kerosene lanterns started acting up too. They'd burn fine for a while, then suddenly flicker and dim even though I'd just filled them up. Sometimes the flames would turn this weird blue color that made my skin crawl. Around noon I found strips of what looked like deer hide tied to tree branches in a line leading deeper into the woods. They were fresh, still had blood on them, and they were arranged in some kind of pattern I couldn't make sense of. The logical part of my brain kept saying it was just local hunters marking their territory or something, but hunters don't usually work in the middle of summer, and they definitely don't arrange bones in geometric patterns. The temperature started dropping too, which made no sense for July. I'd hit these pockets of frigid air that would make me shiver, then step 3 feet to the left and it'd be warm again. My ears kept popping like I was going up in an airplane, and I developed this metallic taste in my mouth that reminded me of sucking on old pennies. But the worst part was the feeling of being watched. You know that sensation when someone's staring at you from across a room? It was like that, except coming from every direction at once. I'd scan the tree line around the cabin and never see anything, but the feeling never went away. If anything, it got stronger as the day went on. That second night, things got a lot worse. I was trying to read by lantern light when I heard the first sounds. A clicking noise, like someone knocking wooden sticks together, coming from multiple directions in the forest. It would start up in one spot, then answer from another spot maybe 50 yards away. Then a third voice would join in. The pattern was too regular to be natural, too organized to be random. Then came the footsteps, heavy ones, circling the cabin in a slow, methodical pattern. I grabbed Eddie's biggest hunting knife. He pressed my face to the window, but all I could see was darkness. The footsteps would complete one full circle, pause for maybe 30 seconds, then start another lap. This went on for hours. Around 3 in the morning, I heard my uncle's voice calling my name from the woods. "Marcus," it said, flat and emotionless. "Marcus, come on out here." Now Eddie had been dead for months, and his voice shouldn't have sounded like that even if he were alive. Like someone trying to imitate human speech but not quite getting it right. I didn't go outside. When morning came, I found more evidence that something had been messing around. Uncle Eddie's hunting trophies had been moved around inside the cabin. Not stolen, just rearranged. The deer heads were all facing the same direction now, toward the door. His taxidermy fox had been positioned like it was stalking something, and the bear hide had been spread out on the floor in what looked almost like some kind of ritual arrangement. Outside, there were footprints in the mud around the cabin, human-shaped, but wrong. Too long, with what looked like claw marks at the tips of the toes. And there were more bone arrangements, complete animal skeletons assembled in poses no living animal would ever make. A deer skeleton sitting upright like it was begging. A raccoon skeleton with its little hands pressed together like it was praying. The clicking sound started up again that afternoon, and this time I crept to the window to look. That's when I saw it, tall, pale, walking on two legs like a person but moving all wrong. Its arms were too long, hanging almost to its knees, and its fingers looked more like twigs than flesh and bone. It was arranging more bones, working with the concentration of an artist, building these elaborate tower structures out of femurs and rib cages. I watched it for maybe 10 minutes, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The thing moved with purpose, like it was following some kind of blueprint only it could see. It would pick up a bone, examine it from different angles, then place it precisely where it belonged in whatever it was building. When it was satisfied with one section, it would step back and tilt its head like it was admiring its work. That's when I realized the awful truth. This thing was using Uncle Eddie's hunting trophies as raw materials. It had taken apart his mounted animals and was rebuilding them into something else, something that followed rules I couldn't begin to understand. As I watched, another one appeared from deeper in the woods, then another. They worked together like they'd been doing this for centuries, passing bones back and forth, building these impossible skeletal cities throughout the hollow. And every so often, one of them would pause and look directly at the cabin, directly at me, like they knew I was watching. I spent the rest of that day barricaded inside, but I could hear them working, scraping, clicking, tapping, the sound of bones being sorted and assembled. When darkness fell, they got bolder. One of them actually came up to the cabin and started examining the walls, running those long fingers along the wood like it was taking measurements. Around midnight, I woke up to find one of them standing inside the cabin. I don't know how it got in. The door was still barred, all the windows were latched, but there it was, crouched next to my bed, studying me with eyes that looked like polished stones. Up close, its skin was the color of old parchment, stretched tight over a frame that seemed too long for its body. When it breathed, it made this rattling sound like wind through dried leaves. It reached out with one of those twig-like fingers and touched my arm, my ribs, the side of my skull. Not rough or threatening, just examining. Like it was measuring me, figuring out how I was put together. Then it made a series of clicking sounds, almost like it was trying to communicate, and gestured toward the door. I followed its gaze and saw what it had built during the night. A massive bone cathedral stretching from the cabin all the way to the tree line, complete with arches and spires and delicate latte work made from the skeletons of dozens of animals. In the moonlight, it was beautiful in a horrible, alien way. The creature looked back at me and clicked again, and I understood what it was offering. It wanted me to join them, to become part of whatever they were building. It had studied Uncle Eddie's taxidermy work and thought I might be interested in their version of the craft. The way it looked at me, I got the distinct impression it wasn't planning to wait for an answer much longer. That's when pure terror kicked in and overrode everything else. I bolted for my truck, not caring about noise or stealth or anything except getting away from that place. The bone creatures followed, but they moved through their skeletal city like it was a jungle gym, swinging from bone to bone with an agility that should have been impossible. My truck started on the first try, thank God, and I gunned it down those logging roads without looking back. The radio picked up a country station once I got about 5 miles away, and I've never been so happy to hear anything in my life. I drove straight to the sheriff's office in Beckley and tried to explain what I'd seen, but when we went back up there the next day, everything was gone. No bone sculptures, no evidence of any kind of construction, nothing. Just Uncle Eddie's cabin sitting peacefully in the woods like nothing had ever happened. The sheriff figured I'd been drinking Eddie's moonshine and seeing things, and honestly, I almost wished that were true. But I know what I saw, and I know those things are still up there, building their bone cities and waiting for the next person to stumble into their hollow. I sold the cabin to the first buyer, made an offer, didn't even negotiate. Took a job as a desk clerk at a hotel back in Pittsburgh and haven't worked construction since. Can't stand the sight of bones anymore. Won't even eat chicken wings. And I've never been back to West Virginia, not even to drive through. Sometimes I wonder if those creatures learned anything from Uncle Eddie's taxidermy work, if they're still up there in Raven's Hollow, perfecting their craft. But mostly, I try not to think about it at all. My name's Tommy, and I'm 19 now. I go to college up in Asheville studying anthropology, though I'm not sure I'll finish. See, something happened to me last fall that changed everything. My grandmother always told me stories about the old Cherokee spirits in the mountains, but I figured they were just stories. You know how it is when you're mixed. Cherokee on my mom's side, white on my dad's. I was always trying to figure out where I fit in. That's why I was out at Raven Creek Gorge doing research for my thesis. I thought maybe if I could study our traditional stories and sacred places, I'd finally understand who I was supposed to be. I wish I'd just stuck to books. The whole thing started as a legitimate research trip. I was working on my thesis about cultural memory and Cherokee oral tradition, basically how stories get passed down and what they mean to people today. My grandmother, she's full-blood Cherokee, had been telling me about Raven Creek Gorge since I was little, said it was sacred to our people, a place where the spirits still lived. She gave me tobacco to take as an offering and told me to ask permission before I entered. I thought it was sweet, you know. Old traditions. I packed my digital recorder, notebook, and camera, figuring I'd spend a few days documenting the area and maybe record some of her stories when I got back. The gorge is beautiful in October. All those autumn colors, perfect weather, peaceful as anything. I found the old trail my grandmother described and left tobacco at what looked like a natural entrance, this gap between two big rocks covered in moss. I asked permission out loud, feeling a little silly, but wanting to respect her teachings. The forest felt normal then. Birds singing, leaves rustling, that clean mountain smell. I set up my camp about a quarter-mile in and spent the first day just walking around taking pictures, getting a feel for the place. Everything seemed perfect for my research. The second morning, that's when I started noticing the stick patterns. At first I thought maybe it was just random. You know how branches fall. But these were too deliberate. Someone had broken sticks and arranged them in geometric shapes all throughout the gorge. Triangles, circles, more complex patterns I recognized from my grandmother's stories. They were Cherokee symbols, or at least they looked like ones I'd seen in old books. I started photographing them, thinking maybe this was evidence of ongoing cultural practices I could write about. Then I started hearing voices, Cherokee words, but not the kind you learn in language classes today. This was Old Cherokee, dialects I'd only heard fragments of from my grandmother's oldest stories. The voices seemed to be coming from different parts of the forest, like people were having conversations just out of sight. I'd follow the sounds, but I could never quite locate the speakers. When I tried to record them, my equipment would malfunction. The digital recorder would just show static, my phone would freeze up. The voices were talking about things that happened long ago. I could understand pieces of it, discussions about ceremonies, about the removal, about sacred knowledge that needed protecting. Sometimes I heard my own name being spoken, which made my skin crawl. How could voices from the past know who I was? I started feeling like I was experiencing someone else's memories. Flashes of ceremonies I'd never attended, knowledge about plants and rituals I'd never learned. By the third day, the stick patterns were everywhere I looked, and they were fresh, newly broken branches still bleeding sap. I realized something was creating them while I slept. The voices were getting clearer too, and closer. I began to understand they weren't just echoes from the past. These were spirits, Cherokee spirits that my grandmother called stick Indians. They guard traditional knowledge, she'd said. They don't like outsiders poking around sacred places, especially ones who aren't fully Cherokee. That's when things got really weird. I'd be walking along thinking my own thoughts, and suddenly I'd know things I shouldn't know. Traditional plant medicines, ceremony protocols that died out generations ago, stories that were never written down anywhere. It was like someone was downloading information directly into my brain. My grandmother's Cherokee was pretty limited, but suddenly I was understanding complex conversations in dialects that haven't been spoken in over a century. The Stick Indians, I never saw them clearly, just glimpses between trees. They were testing me, trying to figure out if I had the right to access Cherokee knowledge, even though I was only half Cherokee and raised mostly white. They'd move my belongings around my camp, arrange them in ceremonial patterns. My camera would disappear for hours, then show up filled with photos I didn't take. Images of ceremonies, old Cherokee faces, sacred places I'd never seen. On the fourth night, I woke up to find myself standing in the middle of the gorge with no memory of getting there. My hands were moving on their own, creating one of those stick patterns, but I wasn't in control. Something else was using my body, and I was just along for the ride. The Cherokee voices were inside my head now, not coming from the forest. They were showing me history, the Trail of Tears, sacred ceremonies, the old ways of living. Centuries of Cherokee memory was pouring into me, and my own identity was getting lost in it. I understood then what they wanted. They wanted me to become a keeper of traditional knowledge. Not the academic kind I was studying for my thesis, but the real kind, the sacred knowledge that's supposed to be protected from outsiders and scholars. They were offering to make me a bridge between the old world and the new one, but it meant giving up who I was. My personal memories were already starting to fade, replaced by ancestral ones that went back generations. For what felt like hours, I was completely taken over. My body moved according to ancient ritual patterns while Cherokee spirits inhabited my consciousness. I experienced what it was like to be my ancestors, the pain of removal, the joy of ceremonies, the responsibility of keeping sacred knowledge alive. But I also felt myself disappearing into that collective memory. Tommy Clearwater, the college kid with an identity crisis, was becoming just another voice in an ancient Cherokee spiritual consciousness. Then, just before dawn, they let me go. The spirits withdrew from my mind, but the connection was still there. I could feel them watching, waiting. They'd marked me somehow, made me a keeper whether I wanted it or not. I stumbled back to my camp with my head spinning, my identity fractured between who I'd been and what I'd experienced. I packed up and hiked out that morning, my hands shaking the whole time. When I got back to civilization, people said I'd been missing for 4 days, but I only remembered 3. My grandmother took one look at me and started crying. She said the Stick Indians had taken my mind, just like in the old stories. She was right. I had cuts all over my hands and arms in deliberate patterns, bark embedded under my fingernails, and I kept speaking Cherokee words I shouldn't have known. The doctors couldn't explain what had happened to me. No drugs in my system, no head trauma. But I couldn't stop arranging objects in geometric patterns, and I'd catch myself drawing Cherokee symbols I'd never learned. Sometimes I'd start speaking in those old dialects, saying things I didn't remember thinking. The psychiatrist said there was nothing physically wrong with me, but my grandmother knew better. She started traditional healing ceremonies, trying to help me integrate what the spirits had put in my head. I dropped out of college after that semester. How could I go back to studying Cherokee culture in books when I had centuries of actual traditional knowledge burning in my brain? But I couldn't access most of it consciously. It was locked away, protected by the Stick Indians until I proved worthy of being a real knowledge keeper. My grandmother said that's how it works. The spirits choose who carries the sacred knowledge forward, and they don't ask permission. I still live with my grandmother now, learning the traditional ways she knows and trying to understand what happened to me out there. I can't go back to being the person I was before, that confused mixed-blood kid trying to find his identity through academic research. The Stick Indians solved that problem for me, but not in a way I would have chosen. Sometimes I think about finishing my degree, but then I'll find myself arranging sticks in my yard without remembering doing it, and I know I'm not meant for that world anymore. I've never gone back to Raven Creek Gorge, and I never will. The spirits are still there, still guarding their knowledge, still looking for people like me to carry their traditions forward. My grandmother says I'm lucky they let me keep most of my own mind. She's heard stories of people who went into sacred places with the wrong intentions and came out completely lost, speaking only in ancient tongues, never able to return to the modern world. To this day, I wake up sometimes with Cherokee words on my lips and memories that aren't mine playing in my head. The doctors call it a psychological break triggered by cultural stress, but they don't understand what really happened. The Stick Indians are still connected to me, still teaching me things I'm not ready to know. And honestly, I'm not sure I ever will be. I'm 31 years old and I work for the State Park Service in West Virginia. Been doing trail maintenance for about 6 years now, mostly because I like being outdoors and the pay's decent enough to keep a small apartment in town. I grew up around these mountains, so I know them pretty well, or at least I thought I did. What happened to me last spring on Devil's Back Trail changed everything I thought I knew about these woods. I don't talk about this much, honestly, because it sounds completely insane, but I need to get it out somewhere, and maybe someone else has seen what I saw. The thing is, I'm still not entirely sure what really happened that day. I mean, I know what I experienced, but the details get fuzzy when I try to piece it all together, like my memory got scrambled somehow. All I know for certain is that I went into those woods with my maintenance crew on what should have been a routine 2-day job, and I came out alone, running for my life from something that looked exactly like me. It started normal enough. We got a call about storm damage on Devil's Back Trail. Trees down, trail markers knocked over, the usual mess after a bad spring storm. The trail's about 15 miles from the nearest road, pretty remote, so we packed camping gear to stay overnight and finish the work the next day. Nothing unusual about that. Me, Dave, Linda, and Tom. He was new, maybe 22, eager to prove himself. Good crew. We'd worked together plenty of times before. Dave drove the park truck as far as the old logging road would take us. Then we hiked in with chainsaws, hand tools, camping gear. The weather was perfect. Cool morning, clear sky, birds singing. Everything felt right. We made good time getting to the damaged section, and that's when I should have noticed something was off. The trail markers we were supposed to repair, they were fine. Perfect condition, actually. Look, like they'd been recently cleaned and painted. Dave scratched his head and said, "Maybe we got the wrong section, but I'd been to this exact spot dozens of times." These were the markers we were sent to fix. Tom suggested maybe park headquarters made a mistake with the work order, and honestly, that made sense. Bureaucracy screws up all the time. But then we found the extra equipment. Sitting beside the trail, maybe 50 yards from where we'd stopped, was another set of tools. Chainsaws, hand tools, even camping gear, all identical to what we'd brought. Down to the same brand of chainsaw oil and the same model sleeping bags. Linda joked that maybe we had a copycat crew, but it wasn't funny. It was weird, really weird. Dave checked the tools over and said they looked barely used, clean, well-maintained, but something felt wrong about them. I can't explain it exactly. They looked right, but they felt foreign somehow, like holding a tool that was made to look like yours, but wasn't quite the same weight or balance. We decided to set up camp anyway. Even if the trail markers didn't need fixing, there was always other maintenance to do, and we were already there for the night. As the day went on, though, I started noticing things about my crew that bothered me. Little things at first. Dave kept using the wrong name for his chainsaw model. He'd been bragging about that particular saw for months, but suddenly he couldn't remember if it was a Husqvarna or a Stihl. Linda, who usually packed trail mix, was eating granola bars she claimed were her favorite, but I'd never seen her eat that brand before. And Tom, who was normally chatty and asking questions, had gotten quiet and focused in a way that seemed forced. By evening, I was getting genuinely unsettled. We were sitting around the camp stove eating dinner, and I swear Dave's voice sounded different. Not obviously different. Tone. More like he had a slight cold or something, but I'd worked with him for 3 years. I knew his voice. This wasn't quite right. That night, I woke up to the sound of voices outside our tents. Quiet conversation, nothing alarming, but it was definitely my crew talking. The problem was I could see Dave and Tom in their sleeping bags from where I was laying. Linda, too. All three of them were clearly asleep, but I could hear all three of them talking outside. I lay there for maybe 20 minutes, listening to what sounded like Dave, Linda, and Tom having a normal conversation about work schedules and weekend plans. The voices were moving around our campsite, sometimes close, sometimes farther away. But my crew was right there, breathing deeply in their sleep. I must have dozed off eventually, because the next thing I remember was waking up to Dave making coffee. Except this wasn't quite Dave. Same height, same clothes, same beard, but his eyes were the wrong color. Dave had brown eyes. This person's eyes were blue. I stared at him for a long moment, thinking maybe I was still half asleep or the morning light was playing tricks on me. But no. Blue eyes. Definitely blue. "Morning, Rebecca," he said in Dave's voice. "Sleep okay?" I mumbled something about being tired and went to splash water on my face. When I came back, Linda was up, packing her gear with mechanical precision. Linda was usually scattered in the mornings, took her time, complained about being stiff from sleeping on the ground. This version of Linda moved like a machine, every motion efficient and purposeful. Tom emerged from his tent, and I almost gasped. He was at least 2 inches taller than the Tom I knew. Same face, same red hair, same work clothes, but definitely taller. That's when I understood, though I didn't want to believe it. These weren't my coworkers. These were something else, wearing their faces. I tried to act normal while my mind raced. What do you do when you realize the people you're camping with in the middle of nowhere aren't actually people? I went through the motions of breaking camp, packing gear, discussing the day's work, but I was watching them, and they were watching me. The fake Dave kept glancing at me when he thought I wasn't looking. Not normal glances, studying glances, like he was memorizing the way I moved and spoke. The fake Linda was practicing my laugh. I heard her do it 3 times while she thought I was focused on loading the truck. And Tom, the thing wearing Tom's face, was the worst. He was practicing my voice, actually standing behind a tree, repeating things I'd said the day before in my exact tone and inflection. I knew I had to get out of there, but we were 15 miles from the truck, and the trail only went one way. I couldn't just run. I had to be smart about it. I told them I needed to scout ahead to check on a bridge we'd heard might be damaged. Normal procedure. They seemed to accept this, though fake Dave offered to come with me. I said I'd be faster alone and started down the trail. The moment I was out of sight, I left the trail and headed straight into the woods. I didn't have a GPS. Cell service was non-existent out there, but I knew the general direction to the truck. I figured if I could make it back to the logging road, I could get help. That's when I heard my own voice calling from behind me. "Rebecca, where are you? We need to stick together." It was my voice, exactly my voice, with the slight accent I try to hide and the way I always sound a little out of breath when I'm worried. But I hadn't said those words. I froze behind a big oak tree and listened. Multiple voices now, all mine, calling from different directions. "Rebecca, this isn't safe. Come back to the trail. We're worried about you. Just call out so we know you're okay. There might be bears out here. We need to stay together." All my voice, all sounding genuinely concerned and frightened. But wrong somehow. The emotion was right, but it felt performed, like someone doing a really good impression without quite understanding what they were imitating. I started moving again, trying to be quiet, but the voices followed me. Always just out of sight, but getting closer. And then I saw one of them. Me. Standing about 30 yards away through the trees, wearing the exact clothes I was wearing, with my hair pulled back the same way. But she was just standing there, perfectly still, watching the woods like she was listening for something. I've never been so terrified in my life. It's one thing to see strangers wearing your friends' faces. It's another thing entirely to see yourself. I backed away slowly, and the other me turned in my direction. Not like she heard me, but like she sensed me somehow. She smiled, my smile, and waved. "There you are," she called in my voice. "We've been looking everywhere for you." I ran, crashing through underbrush, stumbling over roots, not caring about the noise. Behind me, I could hear multiple versions of my voice calling out, but the tone had changed. Less concerned, more commanding. "Stop running, Rebecca. You're going to hurt yourself." "We just want to talk. We're not going to hurt you. You can't get away. We know these woods better than you do." That last one sent ice through my veins. Because it was true. I'd grown up in these mountains, worked these trails for years. But as I ran, nothing looked familiar. Trees I should have recognized, rock formations I should have known. Everything was wrong. I kept running anyway because what choice did I have? My lungs burned, my legs ached, and I could hear them behind me, coordinating like a pack of wolves. "She's heading toward the creek. Cut her off at the old bridge. I'll circle around from the north." All my voice, but different personalities. One sounded tactical and cold. Another sounded excited, like this was fun. A third sounded almost bored, like this was just a job. I realized they were hurting me every time I tried to change direction. One of them would appear just far enough ahead to make me veer away. They were driving me toward something, some place they wanted me to go. The trees opened up into a clearing I'd never seen before, though it felt like it should have been familiar. Flat ground, about the size of a football field, with a ring of old-growth oaks around the edges. In the center was what looked like a camp, but not a normal camping spot. No fire ring, no clear spots for tents, just personal belongings scattered in precise arrangements. Backpacks, clothes, tools, camping gear. All of it looked used but organized with mechanical precision. As I stood there trying to catch my breath and figure out where I was, they emerged from the tree line. Dozens of them. All me, but slightly different versions. Different clothes, different hair, different expressions. Some looked like me from years ago, younger and thinner. Others looked older, harder, like versions of myself that had lived different lives. The one in the center, the one who looked most like the real me, stepped forward. "We've been waiting for you, Rebecca," she said in my voice, but with an emotional flatness that made my skin crawl. "We know this is confusing, but we're not here to hurt you. We're here to help." "Help with what?" I managed to ask, though my voice came out as a croak. "Integration," she said, like that explained everything. "We've been studying your life, your work, your relationships. We've learned how to be you better than you can be yourself. More efficient, more focused, better at your job." She gestured to the scattered belongings around the clearing. "Every person who's worked these trails, every maintenance worker, every hiker, every hunter, we learn from them and then we become them. We live their lives more successfully than they ever could." "What happened to the real people?" I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. The false me tilted her head in a way that looked almost human but felt completely alien. "They become part of us. Their memories, their experiences, their knowledge. Nothing is lost. They live on, in a sense, just optimized." Behind her, other versions of myself nodded in perfect synchronization. It was like looking at a hall of mirrors, but each reflection was slightly wrong. "The process is painless," another me said. "This one looked exactly like I had at 25 when I first started working for the Park Service. You'll feel yourself becoming part of something larger, something better." "We'll take care of your apartment," said a third version. "Your job, your few friends, will be a better Rebecca than you ever were." I don't know what came over me. Desperation maybe, or just pure instinct. But I remembered the emergency flare I always carried in my pack. Park Service requirement for remote work. I'd never had to use one before, but as I fumbled for it, every version of myself in that clearing took a step back. "Rebecca, don't," the central one said. And for the first time, her voice carried genuine emotion. Fear. I pulled the cap off the flare, and it ignited with a brilliant red light that lit up the entire clearing like daylight. Every single one of my duplicates recoiled, covering their eyes and making sounds I'd never heard before. Not quite human, not quite animal. In that harsh red light, I could see them changing. The perfect human faces were slipping, revealing something underneath. Gray skin, too smooth features, eyes that reflected light like an animal's. They were tall and thin, with arms that seemed too long and fingers that bent in ways human fingers shouldn't. I held the flare high and started backing toward the tree line. They followed, but kept their distance, moving in that perfect coordination but staying out of the brightest part of the light. "You can't run forever," one of them called in a voice that was no longer mine. "We know everything about you now. We know where you live, where you work, who you care about. We can be you anywhere." Maybe that was true, but I ran anyway. Back into the woods, using the flare like a torch, crashing through underbrush toward what I hoped was the logging road. Behind me I could hear them following, but they stayed back, out of the light. The flare burned for maybe 15 minutes. When it finally died, I was alone in the dark woods, but I couldn't hear them anymore. No voices, no footsteps, nothing. Just normal forest sounds. Owls, rustling leaves, the distant sound of water running over rocks. I walked for hours in what I hoped was the right direction, using my phone's flashlight sparingly to save battery. When the sun finally came up, I recognized where I was, about 2 miles from where we'd parked the truck. I was exhausted, dehydrated, and covered in scratches, but I made it. The truck was right where we'd left it, keys in Dave's coat pocket hanging on the passenger seat. I drove straight to the ranger station and told them my crew was missing, that we'd gotten separated during an equipment failure and I'd gotten lost trying to find them. They organized a search party, helicopters, search dogs, the whole operation. They found our campsite, found the extra set of tools I'd mentioned, but no sign of Dave, Linda, or Tom. The official report listed them as missing persons, presumed lost in the wilderness. The case is still open. I took a leave of absence after that. Couldn't bring myself to go back into those woods. Couldn't even drive past the turnoff for Devil's Back Trail without having a panic attack. When I finally returned to work 3 months later, they transferred me to a different district, working trails closer to town with better cell coverage. But here's the thing that really haunts me. About a month after the incident, I ran into someone who looked exactly like Linda at the grocery store in town. Same face, same voice, same mannerisms. She even knew my name, asked how I was doing, mentioned she'd heard I'd had some trouble on a work assignment. I wanted to believe it was really her, that somehow she'd made it out of the woods and just hadn't contacted the authorities yet. But when I looked closely, her eyes were the wrong color, just like fake Dave that morning at camp. And when she smiled, it didn't quite reach those wrong-colored eyes. I see them sometimes now, not often, but enough to know they're out there. Dave pumping gas at a station on the highway, Tom working construction on a road crew downtown. Always just different enough that I can't be sure, but familiar enough to make my hands shake. I still work for the Park Service, but I don't do remote maintenance anymore. I stick to day trips, busy trails, places where there are always other people around. I carry 2 flares now instead of 1, and I never work alone. Looking back, I think about what that thing wearing my face said about optimization, about being better versions of the people they replace. Sometimes I wonder if they were right. Maybe the fake Linda really is doing a better job at whatever life the real Linda had. Maybe fake Dave is a more efficient worker, a better friend, a more reliable person. But then I remember the way they moved in perfect coordination, the way they spoke without real emotion, the way they saw human beings as just another resource to be optimized and improved. And I know that whatever they are, they're not us. They're something else entirely, wearing our faces like masks, playing at being human without understanding what that really means. I've never been back to Devil's Back Trail. The Park Service closed that section permanently after the disappearances, said it was too dangerous for routine maintenance. Part of me wonders if they found something else out there, something that made them decide it wasn't worth the risk. But mostly I try not to think about it. I do my job. I go home to my apartment. I live a normal life. Except sometimes, when I'm brushing my teeth or making coffee or just going about my routine, I catch myself in the mirror and wonder, am I really me? Or am I just another one of them, So perfectly integrated that I don't even know the difference? I guess that's the real horror of it. How do you know for sure that you're still yourself? I'm 47 now, and I've been a police officer for the better part of 23 years. Started out in Charlotte, worked my way up through different departments, and eventually landed with the state police doing search and rescue in the Western Mountains. It's good work, honest work, and most of the time it's just helping lost hikers or tourists who bit off more than they could chew on some trail. I've got a daughter in college and a mortgage like everybody else. Normal life, you know. But there's this one case from 2017 that I still can't shake, and honestly, it's part of why I'm thinking about early retirement. The call came in on a Tuesday morning in late October. Family of 4 hadn't come back from a weekend camping trip up on Bone Mountain. That's in the Nantahala Forest, about 40 miles west of Asheville. The Kowalskis, Mark and Sarah, both in their 30s, and their 2 kids, Emma and Jake, maybe 8 and 10 years old. They'd been planning this trip for months, apparently. Had all the right gear, experience camping, the whole 9 yards. But they were supposed to be back Sunday evening, and by Tuesday morning, nobody had heard from them. Bone Mountain's got a reputation. It's not the highest peak in the area, but it's remote as hell, and the trails aren't well marked. We get maybe 3 or 4 missing persons cases up there every year. Usually it's just people who took a wrong turn and spent an extra night in the woods, or maybe someone twisted an ankle and couldn't make it back to their car. But every now and then we'd find evidence of a camp and no people. Just gone. I remember driving up that winding Forest Service road with my partner Mike, talking about how we'd probably find them holed up in their tent, embarrassed about getting lost. The weather had been decent that weekend, cool but not cold, no rain. Perfect camping weather, really. My body camera was recording everything, standard procedure for search and rescue operations. Looking back, I'm glad it was. We parked at the trailhead around 10 in the morning. The parking area was mostly empty except for one car, a blue Honda Pilot with Pennsylvania plates. Had to be theirs. I ran the plates on the radio to confirm, and dispatch verified it was registered to Mark Kowalski, so we knew they'd made it this far at least. The trail starts easy enough, just a gentle incline through mixed hardwoods. October in the mountains is beautiful, all those reds and oranges and yellows. But as we hiked deeper, I started noticing things were too quiet. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, none of the usual forest sounds. Mike noticed it too. Just our boots crunching on dead leaves and our breathing. About 2 miles in, we found their first campsite, or what was left of it. The tent was still there, set up properly, but the rainfly was torn and flapping in the breeze. Their cooler was sitting open, food still inside but starting to spoil. Sleeping bags laid out neat, like they'd just stepped away for a minute. But there was something wrong with the scene. Personal items were scattered around, not like animals had gotten into them, but like someone had been going through their stuff, methodically. I started documenting everything with my camera, bagging some of the personal items for identification. Sarah's purse, Mark's wallet, the kids' backpacks with their names embroidered on them. All there. But no people. Mike was checking the perimeter, looking for signs of which direction they might have gone. That's when I found the first bones. They were scattered around the backside of the campsite, maybe 30 feet from the tent. At first I thought they were deer bones. We see that a lot, predators dragging kills near campsites. But these were different. Longer bone. Yes, and they'd been worked on. Cracked open for the marrow. Gnawed. The bite marks were deep and powerful, but the pattern was wrong for any animal I knew. Too methodical. Too organized. Mike came over to look, and we both just stood there for a minute trying to process what we were seeing. Some of the bones were obviously human. A femur, part of a rib cage, what looked like pieces of a skull. But they were mixed in with animal bones, like someone had been collecting food from different sources and storing it all together. I called it in to dispatch, requested a forensics team and additional officers. But we were at least 2 hours from the nearest backup, and the radio was already getting staticky. Mountain communications are always spotty, but this felt different, like the signal was being actively interfered with. We found the caching sites about an hour later. hidden in rock crevices and hollows, sometimes just shallow holes covered with branches, meat stored like jerky, drying in the mountain air. Some of it was clearly human. I've been to enough crime scenes to know, but it was mixed with deer, rabbit, even bear. All of it processed the same way, cut and prepared with tools. But what kind of tools, I couldn't tell. The tracks we found were the worst part. Large bipedal prints in the mud near a creek, maybe a quarter mile from the campsite. But the feet were wrong. Too long, with what looked like claw marks at the tips of each toe. The stride was longer than human, but the depth suggested something much heavier than it should be. Mike was getting nervous, and honestly, so was I. We'd both been doing search and rescue for years, seen bear attacks, cougar kills, even the occasional murder dumped in the woods. But this felt different, organized, intelligent. We followed the tracks up a game trail, deeper into the mountain. The trees got thicker, older, less light filtering through, and that's when we saw the territorial markers. Skulls, human and animal both, arranged on fallen logs and rock outcroppings along the trail. Not random, deliberate, like warnings. The human skulls were clean, picked completely bare. The eye sockets seemed to follow us as we passed. I was still recording everything, trying to maintain some kind of professional detachment, but my hands were shaking. The radio was just static now, no matter which frequency I tried. Our GPS units were giving us coordinates that didn't match the topographical maps. That's when we saw the first one. It was standing on a ridge maybe 200 yards ahead, just watching us. Tall, taller than any human, and thin to the point of looking skeletal. Pale gray skin stretched tight over bones, long arms that hung almost to its knees. But it was the head that made my blood freeze. Elongated skull, too big for the neck supporting it, and a jaw that looked like it could crack bones without effort. It didn't move, just stood there, studying us like we were specimens in a lab. Then it made a sound, a clicking, almost like typing on a keyboard, but organic. Wet. Mike grabbed my arm. "We need to go. Now." But when we turned around, there were more of them. 3, maybe 4, positioned along the trail behind us. They'd cut off our retreat without making a sound. That's when I understood we weren't dealing with animals or even primitive humans. These things were intelligent. They hunted as a pack, with strategy. The clicking sounds started coming from all directions now, like they were communicating, coordinating. My body camera caught some of it, though the audio quality was degrading as the battery drained faster than it should have. One of the creatures, the largest one, stepped down from its ridge and started walking toward us. Not fast, not aggressive, just curious. Like it was trying to figure out what we were and whether we were worth the effort to catch. I drew my sidearm, which felt completely inadequate. These thin GS were huge, and there were at least 4 of them, maybe more hidden in the trees. Mike had his weapon out too, but his hands were shaking so bad I wasn't sure he could hit anything. The big one stopped about 50 feet away and tilted its head, studying my gun. Then it clicked something to the others, and they all started moving closer, slowly, patiently. They weren't in a hurry because they knew we had nowhere to go. That's when I noticed the bones they were carrying. Sharpened femurs, filed to points. Rib bones shaped into curved knives. They were using tools, human tools, made from human remains. The smell hit me next. Sweet rot mixed with something metallic. Old blood. These things had been feeding up here for a long time. I fired a warning shot into the air, hoping the sound would scare them off. But they didn't even flinch. If anything, they seemed more interested. One of them, smaller than the others, maybe a juvenile, started making that clicking sound faster, almost excited. That's when I realized they recognized the sound of the gunshot. They'd heard it before, from other people who'd tried to defend themselves up here. Mike was backing toward a cluster of boulders, trying to find some kind of defensible position. But these things knew the terrain better than we did. They'd probably been hunting on this mountain for decades, maybe longer. My radio crackled once, a burst of static that might have been dispatch trying to reach us, but it was too late for backup. We were on our own, and these things were closing in. The big one made a decision, I could see it in the way it straightened up and clicked something sharp to the others. They spread out wider, flanking us on both sides. Professional hunters, coordinating for the kill. I fired directly at the large one, center mass. The bullet hit, I'm sure of it, but the creature barely stumbled. Just looked down at its chest where dark fluid was seeping out, then back up at me, and I swear, it smiled. That's when they rushed us. I emptied the rest of my clip, but there were too many of them moving. Too fast. Mike got off maybe 3 shots before one of them reached him. The sounds he made, I still hear them sometimes at night. I ran. Not proud of it, but there was nothing else I could do. Left my partner, left my equipment, just ran down that mountain as fast as my legs could carry me. Behind me, I could hear them following. Not running, just walking at that patient pace. They knew I'd tire eventually. But something strange happened as I got closer to the trailhead. The sounds faded. The clicking stopped. When I finally made it back to our patrol car, my radio was working again. GPS was giving me correct readings. Like crossing some invisible boundary had brought me back to the normal world. I called for backup, told them officer down, multiple suspects, send everything. But when the cavalry arrived 6 hours later and we went back up that trail, there was nothing. No bones, no caches, no territorial markers. The Kowalski campsite was clean, like they'd never been there at all. They found Mike's body 3 days later, about a mile from where I'd left him. Official cause of death was bear attack, though the medical examiner had some questions about the bite patterns that never made it into the report. My body camera footage was classified, sealed away somewhere I'll never see it again. The area around Bone Mountain was quietly declared off-limits to civilian camping. Wildlife management was the official reason, but the missing persons reports from that area dropped to 0 overnight. I transferred to a different department after that. Couldn't handle search and rescue anymore, knowing what was really out there in those mountains. Still can't sleep through the night, and I find myself checking locks multiple times before bed. Sometimes I wonder if they're still up there, those hunger walkers, still hunting, still feeding. The Forest Service reports show the deer population in that area has been steadily declining for years, like something's been picking off the wildlife piece by piece. I've never gone back. Never will. But sometimes when I'm driving past the Forest Service roads that lead up into those mountains, I think I can hear it carried on the wind. That clicking sound, patient and hungry, waiting for the next group of hikers who think they know what they're getting into. They don't. And honestly, I hope they never find out. My name's Marcus Chen, and I'm 28 years old. Back in 2016, I was making a decent living as a cave photographer, which I know sounds like a weird job, but there's actually good money in it if you know what you're doing. I'd been spelunking for about 15 years at that point, ever since I was a kid, and I had this whole portfolio of underground shots that magazines and documentaries would pay for. National Geographic had just commissioned me to photograph some unexplored sections of Deep Creek caverns in eastern Kentucky. It was supposed to be a routine job. Go in, get some shots of the formations nobody had seen before, come back with a fat paycheck. I'd done dozens of these solo expeditions. The caves were my second home. Deep Creek Caverns is this massive limestone cave system that goes on for miles underground. Most of it's been mapped, but there are always new passages opening up after floods or rockfalls. And that's where the money shots usually are. The formations in the unmapped sections are pristine. No tourist footprints, no vandalism, just pure cave beauty that's been sitting in the dark for thousands of years. I had all my professional gear with me, multiple camera bodies, specialized cave lighting rigs, rope systems, emergency equipment. I'd even told the local caving club about my timeline and set up check-in procedures because, even though I was experienced, you never go into an unexplored cave system without someone on the surface knowing where you are. The first part went perfectly. I entered through the main entrance around 10 in the morning, spent about 2 hours in the mapped sections getting some establishing shots. The cave was behaving exactly like caves are supposed to. Cool, quiet, predictable. I was feeling good about the mission, already thinking about which shots would make the best magazine spreads. My equipment was working flawlessly, and I was making great time through the familiar passages. Then I reached the boundary where the mapped territory ended, and the real work began. The first thing I noticed was the bones. Not just a few scattered animal bones, which you see sometimes in caves, but human bones mixed in with deer, bear, smaller animals. They weren't just scattered randomly either. Someone or something had arranged them into what looked like sleeping areas and food storage piles. Fresh marrow had been sucked out of some of the larger bones. The smell hit me next, this heavy musk mixed with decay that made my eyes water. I should have turned around right then. Looking back now, I still don't know why I didn't. Maybe it was professional curiosity. Maybe it was the money National Geographic was paying me. But I kept going deeper into those unmapped passages. I started finding claw marks gouged deep into the cave walls. Not bear claws, something with opposable thumbs that could grip and tear limestone like soft wood. The scratches followed the cave passages like territorial markers. That's when I started hearing the sounds. Scraping, clicking, movement through passages that were too narrow for any normal person to fit through. At first I thought it might be bats, but bats don't make sounds like that. These were deliberate, almost like communication, and they were coming from multiple directions, like whatever was making them was moving through the cave walls themselves, parallel to where I was walking. I stopped to check my camera bag at one point and found it had been moved. Not knocked over or damaged, just examined. Like something had carefully gone through my equipment with curious hands, then put everything back almost exactly where it had been. That's when I really understood that something intelligent was down there with me, and it had been watching me work. The first time I actioned, Ally saw one of them. I nearly dropped my camera. I was setting up a shot in this big chamber when my light swept across the ceiling, and there it was. Pale, stretched out like someone had taken a person and pulled them on a rack until all their proportions were wrong. It was climbing on the ceiling like a spider, moving with this fluid grace that shouldn't have been possible for anything with bones. The thing about it wasn't just how it looked, it was how it moved. Too quick, too flexible, like it was more comfortable hanging upside down than walking on the ground. Then I heard the clicking sounds again and realized there were more of them. They stayed just outside my light range, but I could see glimpses. Elongated limbs, skin so pale it was almost translucent. Faces that might have been human once but had adapted to permanent darkness. They were communicating with each other, and it was sophisticated. Not animal grunts or simple calls, but complex patterns of clicks and scrapes that sounded almost like language. The worst part was watching them use tools. Sharpened bones, rocks that had been deliberately shaped. They weren't just animals that happened to live in caves. They were intelligent, organized, and I was trespassing in their territory. I tried to back out slowly, but they were already surrounding me. They knew the cave system better than I could ever hope to, using shortcuts and hidden passages to cut off my escape routes. Every time I thought I'd found a way out, they were already there waiting. That's when they started attacking my lights. They'd learned that I needed light to see, and they coordinated their attacks to destroy my equipment systematically. First my main camera flash, then my backup lights one by one. I was down to emergency flares and whatever power was left in my headlamp. In the darkness, they had every advantage. I found myself trapped in this narrow passage where my size worked against me. Up until then, being bigger and stronger had felt like protection, but squeezed into that tight cave corridor, I could barely move while they could flow around me like water. One of them came at me directly, the leader, I think, and I had to fight it with just my cave knife and whatever camera equipment I could use as weapons. The thing felt wrong in every way. Its skin was cold and damp like cave walls, but it moved with this horrible strength. Fighting it in that narrow space was like wrestling with a nightmare. It had these deep-set eyes that reflected my headlamp like an animal's, and when it opened its mouth, I saw teeth that had been filed or worn into points. I managed to hurt it enough to make it back off, but I could hear the whole pack getting more aggressive. They were making these low hissing sounds now, and the clicking had turned into something that sounded angry. I realized they weren't just defending their territory anymore. They were hunting me. The only reason I got out was panic and luck. I abandoned most of my equipment and used my emergency rope system to rappel down this vertical shaft that I hoped they couldn't follow. The rope cut into my hands as I slid down too fast, but I could hear them above me, and their sounds were getting fainter. By the time I hit bottom, I was bleeding from a dozen claw marks, and my whole body felt like it had been put through a blender. I crawled through cave passages for what felt like hours, following air currents and hoping they led to the surface. When I finally saw daylight, I almost cried. I stumbled out of that cave system torn up, covered in mud and blood, with none of my photography equipment and no proof of what I'd seen down there. I told the emergency room doctors it was a climbing accident. Rock fall, equipment failure, the usual cave dangers. They patched me up and didn't ask too many questions. I reported unstable cave conditions to the local caving authorities to make sure nobody else would go exploring those unmapped sections. The last thing I wanted was for some family to run into what I'd found down there. National Geographic wasn't happy about losing their photos and equipment, but they understood cave accidents happen. I paid them back for the gear out of my own pocket and never told them what really went wrong. I haven't been in a cave since. Not for work, not for fun, not even the safe tourist caves with guided tours and electric lighting. The thought of being underground, especially in tight spaces, makes me break out in a cold sweat. I switched to landscape photography, mountains, forests, anything where I can see the sky. My friends think I just burned out on cave work, and I let them think that. Sometimes I wonder if those things are still down there, if they've moved deeper into the cave system, or if other cavers have run into them. But I never tried to find out. I never went back to eastern Kentucky, never even drove through that part of the state again. Some experiences change you in ways you can't undo, and that was one of them. I still wake up sometimes thinking I hear that clicking sound, and I have to turn on every light in my apartment to remind myself I'm not underground anymore. To this day, I can't handle small spaces, and I sleep with a light on. People think that's weird for a grown man, but they don't know what's really living in the dark places under the mountains.